Hi, this is your video for the Metcalfe's chapter for this week, and when you read this chapter you'll see that it's much more concise in terms of the time frame, which is nice. And it also is more familiar because India by this point is much more integrated into a larger world context, and this is a world context that I think most of you are probably more familiar with. Those of you who've studied history have some sense perhaps of the 18th century, early 19th century, but when we start getting into concepts like nationalism and World War I, these should ring a bell, okay, and give you sort of a good reference points for what's happening in the world. Okay, so in terms of what we can look for in this chapter. Okay, in the previous chapter we saw that 1857 was kind of pitched as this hinge for the history of the British Empire, right? There's the before 1857 and the after, and things change pretty dramatically. Okay, but histories don't always follow the same kind of timeline, right? So we have histories that overlap and interact with each other. So for example, we have the history of empire and the history of sort of the modern Indian nation state, okay? And these are not sort of successive entities. We don't have empire, 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 and then a flip to the Indian nation state, right? We have these histories that are embedded. Okay, so we can look at 1885 as a point within the British Empire, the founding of the Indian National Congress, but it's also really a foundation date for the modern Indian nation state. So these histories are kind of coming together. What I mean by this is you'll start to see that many of the kind of modern ways of social organization that we think of in India, right, these sort of buzzwords like caste or religious identities that seem so strong today, you can really see how these are taking root in this time, from the 1880s onwards, quite different from what we saw in the Mughal Empire or even the early British Empire. Okay, so you can think specifically about caste and religion in this chapter. These are categories that, as we've seen, were really important to the British, right? They did these censuses, they made up these separate codes of law. But think about how Indians are starting to use these to totally integrate and infiltrate other kinds of fields, right? They're creating new ways of managing these old terms of identity and ones that the British think are important. So we start to see these things come together. So consider caste and religion as you read, and think about this as sort of transferring to kind of a founding of the modern Indian nation. Okay, happy reading.